All right. We on.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited. We are so excited that you are joining another wonderful 12 noon Bible study in honor of Black History Month on today. That's right. Today is February 1st, 2022. And this is the time where we celebrate our Black history, our Black presence, and our Black future. The good news is we don't just have 28 days when we can do this. We can celebrate all year round our cultural heritage. But during the month of February, we are excited because this is an opportunity where we can highlight just a tad bit more for persons who need education around our history and about our identity. And so the particular passage that we're delving into, or the theme or topic for our time together, is we are studying the unfortunate yet with wise and insightful story of Emmett Till's unfortunate murder. We are studying what was it like for his mom and family to experience trauma from his unfortunate murder, and how this murder was state-sanctioned violence, if you will. And so when we first gathered, we talked about some introductory questions that we had invited you to reflect on. So I hope you can pull out your notebook. Pen, paper to please take notes. I hope that you were able to reflect on the initial introductory reflection questions that we highlighted a couple of Tuesdays ago. And let's get ready to delve into our topic. First and foremost, we want to encourage you. There are going to be a number of books and resources that we are going to highlight during our time together. So if you would please make sure you have pen and paper handy so you can jot these resources down. We also want to invite you to check out two web series. Right now, streaming on Hulu is a series entitled Women of the Movement. Women of the Movement, the story of Emmett Till and his mother, Mamie Till Mobley. We'd love for you to check out this series, as this is the backdrop for our time together. We also want you to check out Eyes on the Prize. That's right, you might have heard of that series before. It premiered on WTTW Channel 11 many years ago, but it is still a golden jewel. And so we want to invite you, if you haven't checked that series out, or maybe it's been a long time since you've checked it out, we want to invite you to rewatch the series. You could watch the series for free on HBO Max or YouTube. That's right. Simply Google Eyes on the Prize on YouTube. You could watch it for free. If you have an HBO Max subscription, you could also watch it for free there as well. The study guide that we are going to be highlighting today is called the Eyes on the Prize Study Guide. The Eyes on the Prize Study Guide. And so I want to invite you to have your cell phones ready, because you can screenshot images that we place on the screen on today. And so let us jump into our text for today. Last time we met, when we first were doing our introduction, these were the particular questions that we are highlighted. I'm going to share my screen and share some questions on the screen for you. And so I'm going to ask that you please have your pen and paper ready so that you can begin to jot these questions down. And Pastor Jackson, last time we met, mention an eye-opening statement that I want us to start with today that is pivotal for our conversations today. I'd like to first let us talk about the theme of parental wounds. Parental wounds. WOUNDS, wounds, parental wounds. Is it possible to talk about the story of Emmett Till without talking about the tragic circumstances around his biological father? Oftentimes, as you will see in the movie featured on Hulu, or as you will see in the Eyes on the Prize video that you watch on YouTube or HBO Max, we tend to only shed light on Emmett Till's mom. We, in some sense, paint this picture. Much of our media has painted this picture as if Emmett Till's mom was a single mom, if you will, and that dad did not want to be in the picture. And that is not true. That is not true. That is not true. That is not true. We learned early on that there was unfortunate circumstances that contributed to Emmett Till's dad, unfortunately, losing his life. In a similar way, which is often a bit sad and maybe eerie or prophetic, that it would also come to symbolize the same way Emmett Till would pass away and die, unfortunately. But his father is also killed. And so I'll pause for a second and ask our pastor to expound on this first point he initially made about Emmett Till's dad.
Yeah, his father, a few years, I forgot what age Emmett would have been, but his father was in the Army, and he was accused and convicted of harassing a couple of white women, and one of the white men, well, a third white woman died, and he was accused and convicted and executed. He was executed. The circumstances and the details have always been sketchy. The Army has not released the details, and you know the context and all of that good stuff. He was just another Black man that the Army said, "You guilty and you dead." And they killed him. They executed him. So, as Dr. Buhuro said, unfortunately, this is somewhat of a foreshadow, of Emmett, and it's and you're right, it's not mentioned enough. It was mentioned when the white men were on trial. It was mentioned, but as oftentimes is done, it was mentioned in a way to try to paint Emmett in some type of picture of being like his criminal daddy or whatever, without even having the facts. But it's not talked about in the media. Rarely ever mentioned him or the brother that is in the show that his mom then married, who was by her side, struggling with her and organizing with her throughout. So yeah, thank you for that.
And so this brings us to, thank you so much for that, Pastor. This brings us to the first reflection that we want to spend some time talking about. When we think about Emmett Till's life, we must first reconcile what was it like for him to be the child of someone who suffers trauma and ultimately dies. This will have a huge impact on young Emmett's life. Oftentimes, we don't necessarily pay much attention to the ways in which when violence is bestowed on parents of children or people who have children, this not only impacts the adults who are experiencing the violence, but this impacts their children. And so it is believed early on that our beloved young Emmett Till early on is forced to grapple with a father wound. Yes, he's forced to grapple with a father wound. This father wound shows up because his father is absent, if you will. His father is absent now, not because of anything, again, as our pastor said, not because of anything his father did, but sheer trauma and violence that is committed to his father now causes his father to die, and now causes a father wound, if you will, on young Emmett. And so we generally like to highlight that this story has multiple complex layers. Children who unfortunately don't have their parents in their life, when their parents are taken away from them because of violence, such as Jim Crow lynchings, or such as state-sanctioned violence by police, children now suffer. The children of these persons now develop what we call inner child wounds. And one of the wounds, most prominent, that many children wrestle with when their parents are killed, is abandonment wounds. Abandonment wounds. Abandonment wounds show up in these children, where these children struggle with feeling left out, or they struggle around being scared of being left, or they hate to be alone, or they become codependent, or they're always threatening to run away and leave, or they normally attract emotionally unavailable people. These abandonment wounds show up in the lives of children whose parents are unfortunately killed by state-sanctioned violence, or by Ku Klux Klan members of a racist entity. And so why is this important to highlight? Because when we think about the story of Emmett Till and his desire to go down south to Money, Mississippi, to hang out with his paternal uncle and cousins, there are some who say, looking at this from a psychological perspective, his biggest yearning was because he was trying to contend with his father wound of being abandoned. He didn't want to feel left out. That's why he begged his mother, please, 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 can I go? Can I go and hang out with my uncle Moses Wright and my cousins? I don't want to be left in Chicago. I don't want to be by myself all alone. It is also believed that because, unfortunately, his father was killed when he was when he was young, or at a young age, when he was young, he sought male interaction, male attention from other male figures in his life. So his uncle Moses would be the perfect person who would play this father figure role to him in his life, to help him fill the void of his own biological father not being present in his life. In some sense, his uncle was trying to fulfill this abandonment wound that young Emmett Till wrestled with. During this Black History Month, it is so important for us to reflect on one reflective question is, how can we be present day parental figures to fill in voids when biological members of the family are not available for whatever reason. Who is God calling you to be in the life of, to fulfill maybe an abandonment wound that somebody is wrestling with, somebody is tormented by, somebody is struggling with. This also challenges us to also, number two, reflect on, for those of us who do have biological children, how do we take an active, vested interest in their life? Because these abandonment wounds are huge, and they create wounded inner children that struggle. And so if you are a mom or a dad with children, we want to invite you to remember to take an active role in your child's life so that your child doesn't wrestle with these abandonment wounds. We also say, in caring for many of our children today who have these inner wounded children inside of them, we want to make empathic and empowering and loving statements to them. And so Moses writes, while Emmett Till was visiting with him, he said these particular statements to soothe Emmett's wounded inner child. He really steps in and makes these affirming statements that you see here on your screen important for Emmett to hear. The question for all of us today becomes, how do you make these same statements to people who may be adults, but still have a wounded inner child inside of them? Most studies show that many people who are adults today are just grown adults with wounded inner childs inside of them. Wounded inner childs from what mom or dad was not available in their life to provide. And so as you look at these statements on your screen, I want to invite you to write these statements down. I want to invite you to write these statements down. I want to invite you to write these statements down and make these statements a part of your vocabulary to others, right? Who needs to hear one of these statements? I'll pause there for a second if we have any thoughts from our audience or pastor.
While we are getting some feedback, and so those of you who are on, please, post your feedback so far in the chat. Mostly there's salutations that have been posted, but just to continue your point, that is so real about, all adults have an inner child, and all of us have an inner child that, either has been nurtured and made to feel affirmed and reassured, or has been in some ways or in greater ways neglected. And a lot of our fears and our apprehensions and insecurity come out of that inner child. And then just see how much that is magnified when you live in a society like this that wounds you from, not from birth, but in birth, that wounds you, because we know what happens to the parents when the child has been conceived, what happens to the parents, but the parents go through the issues, the struggle, the strife, the trauma, that then goes through the bloodstream and DNA to the child. And so we living in a society like that, there's so much that you can see has gone into when Emmett, was growing up, Emmett Till. It is, his mother was probably overprotective. Why? Because he wasn't supposed to be born. The doctor had given up on him and told her, you just need to start making plans. He'll never be right, and all of that stuff. And then she had to, along with her mother, and mothers and grandmothers, and this this nurturing is another level that we have to appreciate and talk about. But got him to the point where he could function and all of that, but still remembering the trauma of his birth, really trying to keep him out of harm's way. And so then she has to fight against what you just pointed out. The daddy loss, the need to, to have, some type of male figure, to affirm, and wanting to interact, and other young men, and all that stuff. And then granddad says, we ain't got nothing but land, and all you do is fish and work in the field, and and all the freedom. Oh my God, how that had to pull on him. So still waiting for those who are on listening to add some comment, but I'm gonna throw it back to you right there, Dr. Buhuro.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that also, I'm spending a lot of time wanting us to talk about this, because I'm wanting to also explain how so many times we shame and guilt Mother Mamie Till Mobley for sending Emmett down to the South. We say, oh, she should have known how the South was going to be. She should have known that the city life is much different from Southern living. The politics and policies and culture and the way city life functions is much different from the way Southern life functions. And so I'm spending time setting this up for us in our first session today, because I'd like for us to exercise grace and mercy. Grace and mercy in how we understand Emmett Till's dad and the impact of his unfortunate murder impacted Emmett. And last but not least, how we need to exercise grace and mercy for Mamie in understanding why she chose to say yes to her son. Because, as you talked about, she really was desiring, wanting to empower her son to be around other male figures, because he did not have his biological father in his life. And so we need to take serious a sense of compassion and grace and mercy for our beloved sister. Can you imagine the shame and guilt she must have felt for the rest of her life? I have thought about myself as a parent. I have thought about decisions that I have made that have impacted my son. I have thought about, as a parent, decisions I've made where he asked me, hey, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? And I've said yes. And what are the ways in which now, years later, I may be kicking myself, saying, you shouldn't have said yes to that, right? But at the end of the day, my son is still alive. I can't imagine the pain, the guilt, or the shame this mother struggled with, knowing that she said yes to her son's request. She was trying to do something so powerful in addressing his abandonment issue and father wound from his father being killed, but yet and still something tumultuous and tragic occurs to her and the life of her son. Like, I cannot imagine and fathom what was the trauma, shame, and guilt she lived with for the rest of her life because of her decision. Which brings me to another point. This story, as tragic as it may be, also encourages us to think about, how do we trust our insight? How do we trust that small, still speaking voice that says, don't do that? How do we listen to that small, still speaking voice that may say, watch out now, be careful. You may want to pause for a second. How do we temper ourselves, our wants, our desires, to say, let me wait. There is a reflective piece in this that also makes us think about, are we open and aware when God is speaking to us? There may be tons of voices around us, but can we listen to that still speaking voice? How are we tapping into the spirit of how the divine is speaking to us? How do we learn to trust our wisdom and our instinct when our wisdom and instinct tells us to be careful? Another reflective question for us to grapple with is, how do we free ourselves from shame and guilt? So on the flip side, even if we have made decisions that have been tragic, that have been difficult, that have even meant the difference between life and death, how do we free ourselves from the shame and the guilt of those decisions? I wonder, what was the therapeutic resources for Mamie Teal Mobley to help her find freedom from the shame and the guilt she experienced from saying yes, allowing Emmett Till to go down south? What were the meditations, the prayers, the biblical passages she read that gave her a sense of encouragement or hope? I often wonder, for the rest of her life, did she ever see a mental health therapist? Did she ever see a psychologist? Did she ever see a social worker that could help her deal with the psychological and emotional toil that one faces when they lose their only child? This text reminds us of the importance of freeing ourselves from shame and guilt, because shame and guilt can kill you. Shame and guilt leads to high rates of suicide, depression, sadness, PTSD, and anxiety. And so another reflective question for us today is, what strategies and interventions are we actively seeking to help us find freedom from the shame and guilt that we may wrestle with because of particular life decisions that we have made? I'll pause there for a moment. Any comments?
Yeah. Nicole says, I marvel at Mamie's strength, and she says, we aren't far removed from that time period. And as a mother of three, she doesn't want them to venture out, but they have to manage in this world. And so those that's so far the comment.
So let's talk about that. Thank you so much, because that's the next piece that we want to talk about. Trauma also causes us to build a fence around ourselves. Trauma will cause us to build a fence around ourselves. My mom often tells me that the story of Emmett Till's murder happened or occurred when she was about 11 or 12 years old. And she says, as a result, even though my grandmother brought her and her brothers and sisters, my aunts and uncles, to Chicago, originally from Georgia, she says, when this tragic loss of Emmett Till occurred, or killing of Emmett Till occurred, I should say it like that. She says, immediately my grandmother said, no going down to Georgia for you all for a while, because of what happened to this other boy from Chicago. And so she often talks about how my grandmother became afraid and fearful and kept her and her siblings isolated, not allowing them to just freely go out, especially travel down south. And so we must also talk about the ways in which we have to free ourselves and find healing from trauma, because not only will trauma cause us to experience shame and guilt, but trauma will also cause us to become isolated and now want to hide, build walls around ourselves, build barriers around ourselves so that we're not going out, experiencing all that this life has to offer, seeing the world in all of its infinite beauty and art, seeing the world for all that it has to offer. I am reminded of this is the plight that many mothers faced during the period of Jim Crow. In her book, The New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander talks about the ways in which Black mothers worked hard to keep their sons nearby for fear that if they allowed their sons to leave the home, to walk around the neighborhood, their sons would be lynched. And she talks about the ways in which trauma causes us to build a fence around ourselves. What do we think about when we think of a fence? Usually when we think of a fence, we think of a guard that keeps people out. But oftentimes what we don't think about with a fence is a fence also has a second meaning. A fence keeps us in. A fence holds us back. A fence keeps us from venturing out. And so another reflective question for us to reflect on is, how do we heal from our trauma so that we don't sabotage ourselves by now becoming isolated, refusing to or fearful of experiencing new and exciting experiences that can powerfully shape our lives? What can we do so that trauma does not take over our psyche and keep us secluded, if you will, secluded from other people, secluded from events, secluded from particular experiences that can be so beneficial to us today? You'll be amazed how many children living in Chicago will say that they've never been to downtown because they've only traveled in the small boundaries of the blocks of their particular community for various reasons. And so we must also take into consideration what are the ways in which we need to heal and free ourselves from trauma so that we won't be sabotaging the fullness of where we're called to go in our lives. Other reflective questions for us to think about now as we jump into our story is to talk about these key connections. These key connections we must take serious when we think about the story of Emmett Till, highlighting these particular key connections. I'll give you a moment to check out these particular questions, and I'm wondering if any one of them in particular stands out for you. I'm wondering if any one of them in particular stands out for you. Something that I have often struggled with. I will add another question. To this. Where is the community when we have persons who are not familiar with particular processes, procedures, ways of life for a particular neighborhood? What do I mean by that? A particular issue that I have struggled with is, why did Emmett Till's cousins and the friends in the neighborhood allow him to walk into this store to interact with this particular white woman in the first place? As the movie points out, in some sense, Emmett is edged on by a bet or a wager he makes with particular friends and his cousins. He's edged on by them to go in and say something to Carolyn Bryant. And I'm often left wondering, do they wrestle with you for the ways in which they egged him on and made this wager or bet with him? I'm left wondering a reflective question around, do we have a responsibility to care for our family who may relocate to different parts of the country and not know what are the processes, ethics, and morals for how we interact in particular communities? And so that has often sat with me for some time. Also, was there any sense of shame, frustration, anger, sadness that Mother Mamie Till felt towards these cousins when the full story is told to her? I wonder now the state of their Black family relationship. I wonder if their relationship as a family suffered or harbored any mistrust or distrust, because in some sense, these cousins, in some sense, edge on this city boy who literally did not understand the plight of what he was becoming involved in. I'll pause there for a second.
Yeah, Nicole says, in an earlier point you were making, community supported Mamie, but as Black women, she says, we take on so much and people don't get to help us because we feel we have to carry it as Black women. We got it kind of sense. And then she says, some of us don't recognize our trauma or how it manifests itself. And so those are the comments so far. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. So much of our trauma is misdiagnosed. So much of our trauma is misunderstood, not even acknowledged. I am reminded that we even in this country, some 400, 500, 600 years later, still don't even want to fully acknowledge the trauma of African enslavement and epigenetics and the ways in which today, everything we are living out today is as a result of the trauma we faced during African enslavement. So how do we acknowledge the traumas that we have faced? And then how does larger society also begin to acknowledge and become aware of the trauma we now wrestle with as a result of African enslavement? Yes, that becomes pivotal. I want to invite everybody to check out a word: epigenetics. Epigenetics, epigenetics, epigenetics. Please, please, please check out that word. There's a wonderful book by Joy DeGruy, DeGruy, who highlights this wonderful selection entitled Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, PTSS. This is, most of us have heard of PTSD, but many of us have not heard of PTSS, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And she talks about the ways in which trauma has now even been passed down from generation to generation in our family history. What other questions stand out for you? I'm going to place these key questions on our screen now. So you saw the other questions about connections that were highlighted. We're going to also, during our time together, delve into these particular questions. Something, as we talk about this introduction to the story of Emmett Till, something that I would invite us to also reflect on or think about is it necessary for somebody to be the sacrificial lamb in order for change to occur? Is that always necessary that we need a sacrificial lamb in order for change to occur? Emmett Till's unfortunate, gruesome, tragic murder is known as the catalyst for the national movement for civil rights. His lynching, as it is told or recognized as, in some sense, is what inspired Rosa Parks to remain in her seat, which then inspired Martin Luther King to take the helm of the civil rights movement. And so I wonder, can we make movement without necessarily experiencing a traumatic moment? Can we make movement without experiencing a traumatic moment? Why is it in order for a movement to occur, there must be a traumatic moment? Our current Black Lives Matter movement started as a result of a Trayvon Martin, a Mike Brown being killed in Florida and in St. Louis. The question becomes why? How do we make moves and start movements without necessarily waiting for a traumatic moment to show up and occur? How can we get inspired, riled up, become passionate, action-seeking, justice-oriented people without violence occurring to someone first? Why is it we are a cultural community that needs to experience violence to somebody first before we make movement? Or is that what we need? Just like in our Christian faith, we needed a Jesus to be crucified on an old rugged cross for us to make movement.
As you stir up the pot, you laugh.
Theologically, did we need Jesus to be killed in order to do right by God? God sent his only begotten son to die for the sins of a sick, sick world. I know you have something there, Pastor. Come on.
Oh, I'm going to read comments. Then I'll make my comment. Then I'll make mine. Nicole says epigenetics is real. Charles Dockery says, but of course, Emmett was not fully accepted into the community, just like churches, corporations, and other community. You have to be accepted into the community. And then Nicole says, sacrificial lamb or just a progression of things. The traumatic moment is from a buildup of frustration. You know, you are all through, you have pushed some buttons from what tension was raised in the family, because you know that Mamie being supremely protective had to get Reverend Mose to say, I'm going to take care of him. And so, you know, what you named all of them, what, you know, what shame, what guilt did Mose carry? What did Mamie carry? What internal my anger might have seized in Mose and his children that he told, don't go into the city. And then they go into the city and this other dude, you know, plays this horrible game. Well, plays this game that ends up horrible. And then, you know, thinking of Mamie and what she could have thought about, you know, those are all good. I mean, because another thing that occurred to me that Mamie, when you talked about what resources, what healing, how did, you know, she didn't, because what it appears has happened was that her son was going to be among a list of sons that just died and there was nothing done. The sheriff said, we're not going to let that body go up north. He will not leave here, bury it right away. And so if with barring what she did, it would have just been another statistic. She would have been grieving in great pain, no telling what would happen in the family, mold and all of those. So she seemed to have to jump in and do something. So how did she deal with her grief? She went to work organizing and saying, I'm not going to let my son die in silence. And so that seemed to have, you know, been the thing that she went to, but at what cost, you know, later on, you know, that filled in. Incidentally, Mose Wright, after the trial, had to move to Illinois. He was buried in Burr Oak Cemetery. He could not stay down there because everybody knew it was only a matter of time before they got him. Rosa Parks could not stay in Montgomery. She moved right after things happened to Detroit. She lived the rest of her life in Detroit because she knew that regardless of how much attention has been paid, when the cameras go down, they coming after me. That says something to the protections that we don't have. Jackie says, I believe as a people, we are complacent and need a stirring before an action. Jeanette says, yes, as a child, my father wanted to take us to visit their hometowns. My father was from Arkansas and mother was from Mississippi. And she said she's never been to Mississippi. She never wanted to go back there. Charles says, Emmett Till, Rodney King, George Floyd, he says, we are from Missouri, the show me state. When it's thrown in our face and we see it, then it hits home. And so I'm going to add right here before I turn it back to you. My mother just told me something that I didn't remember about going to Chattanooga. I've shared with y'all. I used to go to Chattanooga every summer when I was a young kid, and those beautiful moments I spent with my grandparents are etched. But there's some moments that I don't even remember. And Mama told me a week ago. She said, you know, because I was asking her about Emmett Till and the funeral and all that. She said she didn't go. She couldn't go to that, you know, see that body and whatnot. But she said, you know, my grandmama called her one night while I was down there, because grandmama had taken me to, I don't know what the store was, but there's a white person who I guess was behind the counter. And the white person said something to me, and I said, yep, yes. I said, nope, no, no. And so grandmama said the white guy looked at her and said, that boy ain't from down here, is he? He said, no. And she said, she never said anything else. She never said anything to me. But just mama saying that, I realized at that moment, I could have been. Because saying, you down south, you had to say, yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Up north, it was just yes or yep, you know, and that could get you killed. So it's you know, it's things like that, you know, we've got a lot of work to do. But, you know, let me turn it back to you, you know.
No, I so appreciate you. I so appreciate you naming that, because that contributes to why so many mothers and fathers today work so hard to teach their children these moral, ethical codes for survival. Because yes, it is a matter. It is a matter of life and death. It is a matter of life and death. And so this becomes a serious conversation as we think about the implications for this. Again, on next week, we're going to get into these particular questions specifically. And so we're asking that you please jot these questions down, because starting next week, we're going to delve into these questions now that we have set the backdrop for our story and talked about Emmett Till's dad and the trauma of him not having his dad in his life because his dad is killed by white supremacy. The trauma also that Mamie had to wrestle with guilt and shame of the decision that she made to say yes. Now we're going to jump into these questions on next week. And so I want to invite you, please jot down these 7 questions, because this will be the focus for our time together on next Tuesday. We also want to let you know, please check out the movie as a backdrop. Currently streaming on Hulu, Women of the Movement, and also watch the Eyes on the Prize series. The Eyes on the Prize series can be watched for free at HBO Max or Amazon Prime. You can also watch the Women of the Movement series on Hulu. So please, please, please watch that series, as that is the backdrop for our time together. We also want you to check out some books. We also want you to check out some books. Please, please, please write the names of these books down. As our pastor said, it's unfortunate when we have to deal with hearing about this story from third parties who really weren't there, who didn't know the story firsthand. And so we want to support people who knew firsthand the stories. And so there are a couple of books that we want to make known to you. If you haven't already heard about these books, please write these books down and add them to your story. Add them to your library. Add them to your library. The first book is Simeon's Story. Simeon's Story, an eyewitness account of the kidnapping of Emmett Till by his cousin, Simeon Wright. Again, it's called Simeon's Story. Please, please, please grab that book. Grab that book, okay? It's very, very important to read these stories directly from firsthand accounts of persons who were there. Pastor also had another book that we should check out that gives a firsthand account of this unfortunate Emmett Till saga. It was Simeon's Story and another book that gives a firsthand account.
Mamie Till's book, Death of Innocence. Mamie Till wrote her own account, Death of Innocence.
Thank you. Death of Innocence, the story of the hate crime that changed America, by Mamie Till Mobley. Please, please, please grab that book. Grab that book. All right, family. Thank you for tuning in. We want to ask a big favor. We'd like to ask you to please share this video. Tell a friend so that we can all learn and sit and have discussions and have a great time together. So please, please, please share this video. Share this video, okay? Thank you.
Amen. God bless you. And after you share it, we look forward to seeing you all on next Tuesday at noon. And thank you so much for the comments and the interactions in the chat. They are awesome and excellent. So thanks again, and we'll see you next Tuesday at noon. God bless.